My name's Andy. I'm an alcoholic. I'm grateful to be here. Thanks, Spencer. Appreciate that. And thanks, Ron, for the reading. I know that section of the book is probably kind of a morbid reading to read at the beginning of a meeting like this, but those first, the first time that I read those few paragraphs at the beginning of A Vision for You, man, the identification that it talks about in there with the loneliness and the terror and the bewilderment and the frustration and the despair, that was me before I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. The last few years of my drinking, the alcohol had stopped working for me, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And for those that are new, I'd like to welcome you. I'm not the CEO of AA or the chairman of the board. When I first started coming to meet Alcoholics Anonymous in Southern California, I would go to meetings like this on Saturdays, and I would see people with time stand up there, and they would come to the podiums dressed. They showed dignity to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I owe my life to this program, and so yeah, that's kind of why I'm dressed up a little bit tonight. And I'd like to thank Spencer as well for introducing me. Kind of like what he said, I met him a few years ago when he was first coming in the rooms at the lunch bunch, and it was funny because that gap in time that I had not talked with him, and then when I came back and started interacting with him, I saw how much he had grown in the program. And I've been going to the lunch bunch has been my home group for 10 years since I moved to Utah, and I've seen a lot of people come into that meeting and stick around for a little while and leave. And Spencer's one that has stuck around, and if you see the blessings that he has in his life, it's because he's willing to do this on a daily basis. This program is for people that are willing to turn it over and take some simple suggestions on a daily basis, and so I'm grateful for him. So I grew up in Orange County, California. I was born and raised there. Lived there till I was 29 years old. Never thought growing up I actually would ever leave Orange County. I think people that come from Orange County think they live in the best place in the world, so why would they ever want to leave? And that's kind of how I felt. But I grew up in a very loving family, and like probably most people's families, there definitely was some dysfunction there. I mean, I was part of it, so I was a part of that dysfunction. But one of the things that I remember early on in my childhood was the tension in my home was always very, very extreme loving or very, very extreme fighting, violence. And so I kind of grew up, I never really knew what like the center of life was. I was always from a child in this environment where I was always pulled to either these two different ways. And I'll share a little bit about my childhood and my teenage years, and to preface this, this experience is my story through my eyes, and so I need to show my family respect because their experience might not be mine. So I'm not up here to badmouth them or paint a picture like I was not loved, because I did come up from a loving family who today I have a great relationship with and I love. But this was kind of my experience, and so some of my earliest memories when I was 3-4 years old was when things were still kind of blurry when you're a kid, was my dad, my biological father, and my mom fighting. like I have vivid memories of that. And my biological father was physically abusive to my mother. And I remember being in, bedrooms with them while they were, fighting and that kind of stuff. And then subsequently, a couple days later, I would be with my dad, and everything would be fine, and everyone would be really loving and stuff like that. And then a little bit later, the same thing, And so I always felt like my emotions were kind of like on this roller coaster. And I'm an alcoholic, and I'm also a great candidate for Al-Anon and codependent as well. And I was the child that was always trying to be good, because I thought if I was good, then that would keep the peace, or I would try to clean the house. I would do those things that we hear about in those associated meetings and stuff. And so when I was about 5 years old, I think my mom had enough, and she had basically took me and left my dad. And we lived for a lot of my life with my grandma. I'm growing up in Orange County, and at that time my mom had some siblings that were younger than her that were still in high school. This was in the 80s, mid to late 80s. And my younger uncle, my mom's younger brother, my uncle, and her younger sister, my aunt, were in high school, and when I was living there, they were doing the things that high school people do at the time. And my grandmother, who is passed away, but she was also one of us as well, and she actually was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. But during that time, my grandma was still active in her disease, and my house that I grew up in was the party house, like the 80s party house, like kegs of beer every weekend. We had a pool. It was like punk rock, and I grew up around that, and I remember being a little kid walking around those parties, and all their friends loved me. I was just this little kid that was walking around, and everyone was super nice to me. And I remember at an early age thinking wow, those people are having a lot of fun. And and I also, was struggling on the inside, and I'm like, man, these people look like they have, have some kind of solution going on in their life. And so, so that's kind of the soil that I was raised in. I'll just say one last thing about my dad. I was never able to reconcile with him. He actually died of alcoholism when he was probably a little bit. I'm 41, so he was, I think, probably 44. He died of liver cirrhosis, and my mom and I actually went out to his funeral in Lake Elsinore, California, and it was sad because there was nobody there, and I used to have a lot of resentments and was mad at him, and blamed him for a lot of things. And subsequently, as I lived my life and followed in his footsteps, I realized that he was just one of us. The only difference between me and him is I was able to find the solution, because I know that if I wasn't able to find these rooms, at that time when I was at that jumping off point, I saw what was in store for me, and I wasn't the kind of guy that was gonna be able to live till I was 80 drinking. It was gonna come sooner for me if I kept going. So that's kind of a little bit of the soil that I was kind of raised in. But like I said, we came from a really loving family, and from the time my mom left my dad until I was about 12 or 13 years old, my mom, I'd never seen her be in a relationship with anybody else. And so her and I were really close. I was an only child. My dad left. Me and my mom were best friends. And, right around the time that I was about to go into junior high, and that really awkward time in your life when you're going through puberty and all of that stuff, my mom met my stepdad. And that at that time, I had a hard time dealing with that. My mom was paying attention to somebody else. My mom and my stepdad ended up getting married, and they had 2 kids, my sisters, who are awesome. And but at that time in my just youth, being selfish and totally self-absorbed, I felt like I was like being abandoned. Like I felt like my mom was basically starting a new life, and I was a mistake, and I didn't know where I fit in all of this. And then, couple that with the fact when I started going to junior high and stuff, it's just junior high, I had a little bit of a hard time fitting in. My mom pulled me out of 6th grade and sent me to a Christian school where there was only it was a small group of people in that school before I went to 7th grade and junior high. And I just felt like I was just totally out of place when I got there. And everyone kind of had their cliques, right? There was like the gangsters and the punk rockers, like the skaters, the Asian boy. It was like a whole thing, and everyone had, and I just didn't know where I was and all of that, and right around that time, I remembered, it had always been in the back of my mind, seeing my aunt and uncle and the parties and that kind of stuff. And when I was a kid, I obviously, didn't think I would do that at that age. But I remember thinking, when I get to that age, like that is what I'm going to do. That's the kind of lifestyle that I want to live. And so, I'm messed up inside, insecure, and ask someone from my family one weekend if I could party a little bit. And I remember I had and it was perfect setting for the beginning of an alcoholic, because I actually got drunk by myself in our garage. So I was ripe for this program. And I had I think it was like a 4-pack of Short Dog tall boys of Budweiser, and a little clay pipe with some stuff in there, and I sat in there, and I remember that feeling coming over me, that warm feeling that we get, especially that first drink, but like a real candidate for this disease and alcoholic, shortly after, I didn't remember anything. And I remember waking up in the morning on my bed with my clothes on, not remembering how I got there. And my grandma, who was in Alcoholics Anonymous by this time, was downstairs when I woke up, and I had summer school the next day, and I was late and hungover, and she was sitting down at the kitchen table, and she just kind of had a smirk on her face, and I tried to play it off, everything was all right and stuff, but she knew. I'll tell you a little bit more about her later, but that was kind of how that started for me. And shortly after, because I was having a hard time figuring out who Andy was, I went and identified with some group, and at that time in Orange County, where I was growing up, there was a lot of local bands and stuff, and it was almost like a whole subculture down there. So for me, it was really hard when I quit drinking, because the alcohol and the drugs and all of that stuff were so interwoven to this whole lifestyle that it was not just about the drink. It was actually who I thought I was as a person. It's funny to say, and I love their music. There was a time where I had to stop listening to it for a while because it kind of just brought up the past. But we used to idolize Sublime. And I used to have pictures of Bradley Noel, posters, you know what I mean? He was my god almost, right? And he overdosed, when he was in the 90s, and so that tells you kind of the people that I was, and God bless his soul. He was sick like us, but so I kind of took on this whole persona. I put on this outfit, and at the time, I was doing the best I could. I probably needed that. I needed something to identify with, and whether it was right or wrong, I think a lot of times we're doing the best we can at the time that we are in our life, and so I don't look back and beat myself up for that. But so I got involved with a group of guys, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel right at home. Felt like I was abandoned a little bit, but I had this group of friends, this core group of friends, and we all kind of thought the same. We did the same things. We all partied together. We stayed up. Did crazy stuff, and talked about cracking the secrets of the universe and stuff at night, and yeah, but the funny thing is through that time, through my teenage years up until I was 20 or 21, my drinking and using was always the same thing. It was always like balls to the wall. Like I never could control it. The second time that I got drunk again, blacked out. And through those years of my teenage years, I unfortunately didn't graduate from high school. I just had a lot of problems that were created by the decisions that I was making in life. And I'll say this too. I think that the funny thing is if you ask me at that time, I can think back on a lot of times in my life, even when I was really messed up. What did I want? Like, who did I want to be? And I will tell you that I probably would have told you even back then the same things that I would tell you right now. Like, I want to be a good family member. I want to be a good person. I want to be a good friend. I want to be a good member of society. I've always inherently wanted those things. And they're the same things that I want today. But what I've learned since I've been coming to Alcoholics Anonymous is that the reason, because I used to feel so conflicted, I would like go to church with my mom on Sunday morning, that she would go to church, and then on Sunday night I'd be drinking, and I would just be like, how is this possible? I was just so confused. I just lived in the gray, I didn't. It was perplexing to me because I felt like my intentions were I wanted to be a good person, but the outcomes that were happening in my life were not reflective of that. And because of that, I would continue to seek, that confusion and that uncomfortableness. I continue to, seek for medicating with, pouring alcohol on it and that kind of stuff. And so by the time I got to about 20 years old, I had some experiences, throughout my teenage years of partying pretty hard and doing different things. And it was just evident, like every time I picked something up, like trouble was going to ensue. And I remember, and some of my friends, we're a little bit older, but people were starting to think like, oh, should we get jobs, and that kind of stuff. And I remember kind of seeing everybody mellow out a little bit, and I was actually kind of welcomed it. But I remember that I remember thinking in my mind that, I'm just gonna drink like beer, that's, I'm not gonna drink all the hard stuff. I'm not gonna go crazy like we were before, but I'm just gonna drink beer, and so that was kind of my plan around that time in my life, my mid to early 20s. And I had a series of kind of highs and lows throughout my early 20s, mid 20s. Somehow I was able to continue to maintain a job with one employer for most of my 20s, which was shocking. And there would be periods where I'd actually kind of do pretty good. Like I'd met some people in work that kind of took an interest in me and kind of helped. It was weird. The place I was working at, they would do these like self-development things, and they would almost do these things that were almost kind of like inventories in a way. And this is way before I even joined AA or really knew anything about that. And so it's funny, when I came here, it kind of made me think about that. But even though things had seemingly got a little bit better, I could look throughout that time in my life, and there was still dotted throughout that time just times where things got really dark in my life. By this time, it was always scary on Friday when you would get off work, because I would do pretty good during the week, and on Friday night, I never knew when that night started, where I'd end up on Sunday or Monday morning. It was just a common thing that I'd take a drink and the drink would take me. And I had a couple, share this just to show that, I don't stop drinking just because of consequences in my life. I had two different scenarios over that time where I, drove in blackouts, and one time specifically, we were at a friend's party, family party up in Whittier, and which is kind of in East LA, and I got pretty drunk and took off, and I did not remember anything, right? And I remember coming to with sparks flying, all that stuff, and pulling off the freeway, and I had no idea where I was, and it was like Christmas Eve, like it was like going into Christmas Day, and I remember walking around the street for a while trying to like get my head right, and finally I was able to find an ATM. This was like right around the time we like cell phones, like I think I had like a Razor like cell phone or something like that, thank God. And I was able to get a hold of a cab somehow. I don't even totally know how I did that. And the guy picked me up and drove me back to my house. And I woke up the next morning, and I was like, oh man, what did I do? Like, I don't know where my car is. I got to put the puzzle pieces, people are going to start asking questions and stuff. And I ended up, after a while of trying to rack my brain, figuring out where I was able to find the receipt of that ATM that I pulled that I had pulled cash out of the night before. And I live in Orange County, and when I pulled it out and looked at what it said, it was in Boyle Heights, Los Angeles, which is like in the hood, like in downtown LA. And, probably because it was Christmas night, I got spared a white kid walking down in that area. And I remember my uncle and my stepdad driving me. We went out there looking for my car and ended up finding it, and I remember just being like, I can't believe this happened. But the funny thing is that, I never thought that, I knew that it was a problem that I did that, but there was never a time where I thought I need to stop drinking. The only thing I was thinking of when I got back home was, damn, I need to get to the liquor store and get on one, right? Because I feel like crap, I'm embarrassed, and I need all this to go away, right? And then, I had some, I had a couple other colorful experiences over the next few years that, I won't share, but are similar stories like that, and never did I think that the solution was me to stop drinking. Like I said before, my grandmother, she had became a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, I want to say probably in 1989 or 90, and I remember as a little kid, she would actually take me sometimes to like central office and down there by where we lived, and they would have little like barbecues, and so I kind of grew up around AA a little bit. I knew about AA. I knew people went there and they didn't drink. Never thought that it was something that I would want to be a part of, but I knew a little bit about it. And it's funny because I think over the years my grandma kind of sat on the sidelines and watched my life. And it's funny because I don't ever remember her preaching to me or trying to tell me that I was an alcoholic or anything like that. But there had came a time I was about 27, and I was feeling like I was just at rock bottom in my life. Like I barely was holding on to a job. What started happening too, which is even harder for me, was because I was having a hard time keeping it together when I was partying. Even my friends seemed like they were not wanting to hang out with me like as much. I remember there would be nights where I'd wake up and like people would have it would feel like there would be like looks of disgust like on their faces, and kind of like what we read, that pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. And for about 2.5 years, I started getting this this kind of thing in my stomach where I just I kind of started just like saying like, God, like please like make all of this stop. And it felt like I was just on like a merry-go-round that I couldn't get off of. But at that time, I wasn't ready. It takes what it takes. I think that when I got to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, it was exactly God's timing. I remember those couple years where things just started getting worse and worse and worse, and I kept trying to control it, like it talks about. I kept trying to, capture those old feelings of the past, and the more I tried, the more fleeting it was, and it was scary because when I was, I think, 28, I had got to a point where, like, the alcohol had totally, like, stopped working for me. Like, I would drink, and I would feel just as crazy in my head as I was when I was sober. Like, it was not doing for me. It was not like a lot of people say, when you read the 9-step promises, those promises for a time are what alcohol did for me. It calmed me. It relieved my stress. It, did all these things. And Bill talks about in the big book, I love the imagery that he talks about when he says that alcohol turned its flight like a boomerang and cut him to ribbons. And that was my experience. That time when I was in my garage when I was like 13 or 14 and I took that first drink, I told myself I'd found the solution to all my problems. And here I was, 28 years old, and came to the realization that solution that I had been using for the past 15 years had stopped working. And that was a very scary place to be, because I was at that jumping off point in my life. I saw the writing on the wall. I knew that if I kept trying to go forward and control this thing, that it was going to get way worse. And I got to that point that we talk about sometimes where and it's like this for me sometimes, even in recovery. Sometimes I have to get to a point of discontent or pain before that idea of changing actually seems less worse than staying where I'm at right now. And that's where I was. I was in such a bad spot that I was totally hopeless, and I was totally willing to do whatever it was to try to get help. And I remember picking up the phone and calling my grandma, and telling her what she already knew, but I said, Grandma, I'm having a problem and I need help. And I remember she used to sponsor a lot of women and stuff, and she did what a good sponsor would do. She gave me some directions. She gave me a meeting list. She gave me a big book. Told me to read Bill's story. Told me to underline where I drank like Bill, felt like Bill, thought like Bill. And I remember starting to do that, and I remember for the first time in a long time having a little bit of hope. And it was funny because I knew that I probably should go check out an AA meeting, but I was afraid. I was afraid to do that. I was afraid of change. I was afraid to change. It wasn't just me quitting drinking. It was at least in my misery, it was familiar. What was on the other side of that door of AA, I did not know. And for a long time, I was able to come to terms that even though I know that this is miserable, I know how this works right here. And so I'm sure probably maybe other people have had this experience, but so the first meeting that I went to, I would drive to another part of Orange County, 30 minutes away to go, so I wouldn't run into anybody that I didn't know, kind of a thing. And I remembered going to about probably 3 or 4 meetings where I drove up and just didn't even have the guts to walk in, and turned around and drove back. But I finally, one day, it was at a Kaiser Permanente hospital in Yorba Linda, and there was a meeting that they had in the basement down there, and I remember driving up and just feeling, it was hard because those days when I had driven up to the meeting and left, it was hard because there was the solution that was in that building, and there was the solution that was behind the glass door at the liquor store. But I knew as I was driving back home that if I went and pulled open that door in the liquor store and got my other solution, that it just wasn't going to work. It was up. The jig was up for me. And so it got to that point, where I finally took that step of courage and walked in. And to be honest with you, for the first few meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, I had no idea. I remember when I think back about me sitting in that room and looking at everybody, I just saw mouths moving and talking happening, but I didn't comprehend anything that they were saying. But what I did feel in those rooms, that my hope is for the people that are new here today that maybe might see me, and maybe if you don't know a lot about Alcoholics Anonymous, kind of what I'm saying is foreign, was that these people that I saw in there actually looked happy. I could tell that they were sober and they were happy, and they had camaraderie with each other, and they were smiling, and I hadn't been around people like, I had to be in a dark bar room with a few, under my belt before I was starting to look at people that were smiling and doing that, and to see these people that were sitting in this bright room with chairs and tables around, just, totally, they just had a different countenance that I had not been around before. And I started to, like we talk about, they had something that I wanted. I didn't know what it was. And so I started coming around. I was still, for the first, year of my sobriety, I pretty much got sober in a different part of Orange County and with a different group of people than I probably should have, because I probably should have went to close to where I lived. But, I had a little bit of hope, and it was in December 2000. So my sobriety date is September 3rd, 2012, and it was in December of 2011 when I started going to AA. So it was about 9 months. I wasn't totally bought into it. I would go to AA. I would like it. I'd feel hope. I'd, maybe go back out, and it would just be horrible. And so I did this experiment for about 9 months until I had got invited to be a best man at one of my good friend's weddings. He got married, and that night of his wedding, we partied. We had a good time. And that next morning on Sunday, which would have been September 2nd, 2012, we woke up. We went to like a Mexican brunch place because everyone was all hungover, and so everyone went to get enchiladas and drink margaritas, and so we went there, and I remember driving home after leaving the restaurant, and just something in my head said, it's done, it's over. And I'm grateful to God for that. At the time, I had a hard time with that. I'm 41 today. I was 29 when I got sober. And at the time, I was like, why, God, is this happening? Like, I'm young. I'm like looking at all my peers and my friends, and they seemingly are still having fun, controlling it, and I remember having a hard time just not understanding why this was happening to me. My identity, that costume that I had put on as a teenager I was being dressed down, and it's funny now. The funny thing is that 12 plus years later, looking back on it, I used to say, like, why, back then I was saying, why, God, how did this happen? Now I'm looking at it like, why, God, did you spare me? Like, thank you, God, that I was able to get out of that trap at such a young age. And I see people come in the rooms and stuff that are my age, and I respect you so much and look up to you. I hear about even my family, who I love and stuff, and I'm not saying any of them are alcoholics, but I mean, I hear, like, oh yeah, my aunt and uncles, or like friends that I still like, keep in contact with, or like, yeah, we were down in Vegas last weekend, and man, just like the thought of that just makes me like want to run outside and just throw up. And so subsequently, I started working this program, and I was living with a good friend, one of my running buddies in Buena Park, and I had gotten an opportunity with my job. The hard part was that I was trying to stay sober, but I was still living in the bubble that I'd grown up with. The people that I was living with in the apartment that I was living in were all still partying, and they were like, dude, when are you going to start partying? It was hard, and I would get home, put my stuff away, leave the house, go to a meeting, go to coffee afterwards, go back home and come in and beeline right to my room and hiding my big book under my hand, and I had gotten an opportunity to, with my previous work, somebody that I was close friends with, she had gotten some promotions and she was doing pretty well, and she had kind of been managing some stuff in multiple states, and she's like, you know what, there's and she knew what I was trying to do. She knew I was trying to change my life, and she said, there's an opening for this position in Phoenix, Arizona. She's like, I went to ASU, it's in Tempe. It's so awesome there. She's like, I think you'd be a great candidate for this job. If you're interested, you should fly out there for a weekend and go check it out. And I did. And I don't necessarily suggest geographical relocations, under your first year of sobriety, but all these pieces kind of fell together. I ended up taking this job, and I moved out there, and it was the best thing that I could have done. It took me out of this bubble that I had grown up in my whole life, and I got plugged in with the groups out in the Phoenix Valley, and I had a lot of more dying to do out there. I didn't realize how much. Not only was I not drinking, but I didn't realize how much the environment that I was living in was just affecting me. My family, my friends, and it was just they were a state away, and I just experienced this burden just lift off of my shoulders. And it was at that time in my life that I found a new sponsor, and I had finished going through the steps with him, and I started kind of identifying who am I? Because I didn't know, who I was, especially since, I couldn't play the role of that guy that I'd played my whole life. And so it was an amazing time. I had a little place out there, was self-supporting. Things were way cheaper out there. I was like, damn, why didn't I move from California a long time ago? And life was good. And I'll kind of go through this pretty quick, but I had started getting a little bit of a feeling when I was out there that I should I kind of felt like maybe I had grown up Lutheran. My mom is, who I love to death and is awesome, is very active in her faith, and I had stopped going when I was a teenager, and I kind of felt like maybe I should go back to church. And at that time, my grandma, who was in AA, she was getting older, and she moved up here. So my mom's brother, who lives up here in Utah, he's a member of the predominant religion up here, and he's always been an amazing guy. And as my grandma was getting closer to the end of her life, he invited her to move up here so he could take care of her. And so I started coming up here, and I started getting acquainted with my aunt and uncle. And I remember going back to Phoenix after one trip up here, and I was like, man, my aunt and uncle seem really happy. And it's crazy. I ended up joining the LDS church when I was living down there, and it was funny because at the time I didn't know if you could actually be LDS and a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I kind of felt like I'm really interested in this church. And I remember calling my grandma because she had her neighbor actually is in the program, a beautiful woman who you guys, some of you probably know. And she kind of helped kind of sponsor my grandma towards the end of her life. I remember calling my grandma and saying, and I remember that this woman that lived up here was in AA, and I'm like, do you know if people that are in AA can actually like be in the LDS church? And shortly after that, I was at work like a day or two later, and I get a call on my phone from a number I didn't recognize, but it said Utah. And I pick it up, and it's this guy on the other line, this French-Iranian guy, who some of you guys probably know, who subsequently has been my sponsor for the past 10 years. And he told me a story, and it was very similar to mine. And so long story short, some circumstances happened, and I ended up moving up here. And I've been in Utah for 10 years, actually, this month. And I'm not here to preach about religion or try to convert anybody, but, the big book says, be quick to see where religious people are right and make use of what they have to offer. And these past 10 years have been, if somebody would have told me when I left California, when I packed my bag to go out to Arizona, that 12 years later I would be living in Utah, Mormon, and check all the circumstances that are going off in my life right now, I probably would have been like, I don't even want that. Like, that sounds, right? That sounds crazy. But with the help of good sponsorship and working this program, I've had miracles happen in my life. I was always so sick and just messed up. Like, I never could have like a healthy relationship with somebody. And I pray and I thank God for that today, because I didn't harm somebody. I didn't get married and tear somebody's life to the ground. And it was funny because when I got sober, I was like, oh, like, cool, my life's getting better. I'll probably meet like somebody. And like a few years went by, I still didn't. And then like I joined the LDS church. I'm like, everyone's married in the LDS church. Like, I'm sure now I'm for sure going to meet somebody, right? A couple of years go by. And so anyway, I was probably 5 or 6 years sober before I met my wife. And I'm grateful that God takes me on the slow path. My experience in Alcoholics Anonymous and recovery is all the blessings that I've had in my life. We say sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. And my sponsor always looks at me and says, slowly. He mouths that to me. And I have a beautiful life today. My wife is here. And I have a life. I have an abundant life today. And another woman in the program who I look up to a lot, she always used to say that she lives a life of transparency. And I love that. I used to compartmentalize my life and hide things from people. And today, most days, I'm okay just being me, And I'll end with this. I could probably write on the wall here all of the blessings that have happened in my life in the past 12 years. Material, career, relationships, as a direct result of Alcoholics Anonymous and working the steps and being willing to work this program on a daily basis. But the one thing that I was searching for when I got here that I have today, that if everything else was gone, I know that if I had this one thing, I would still be okay, and that's peace of mind. I never had peace of mind before I got here. And I know that if I do not put this thing first in my life, and if that peace of mind disappears, and that restlessness and that irritableness and that discontent come back, all this stuff is worth nothing. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here to share my story with you guys tonight. Grateful for the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous in Utah, and grateful for all the people that work so hard to put these meetings together. And my life's a little busy right now. I am going to college, and my sponsor has given me some things that I'm doing in my life that's kind of putting a lot of pressure. And I'm at a place in my sobriety in my life right now where I'm just feeling really stretched. But I know that if I keep putting one foot in front of the other and putting this thing first in my life, that, I don't even know what's in store for me, but I know it's better than anything that I could have ever planned. That's all I got. Thank you.